Life has a way of throwing surprises at you when you least expect them. That's exactly what happened to me on a seemingly normal Wednesday evening. I had just come back from work, my heels clicking against the wooden floor as I walked into the house. The day had been long and draining, and all I wanted was to soak in a hot bath and let the stress melt away. Little did I know that evening would leave an indelible mark on my life, one that would change the course of everything in our household. Make sure to subscribe to my channel so I can continue bringing you more fascinating true stories like this one. And don't forget to watch this video till the end and hit the like button to show your support. This story is going to be incredibly interesting. The house was quiet as I entered, which wasn't unusual. Thomas, my husband, had mentioned earlier in the day that he'd be attending a late meeting. He'd been working long hours lately, trying to make a big project deadline. That left only Logan, Thomas's son from his previous marriage, at home. Logan was 20, a reserved yet polite young man who rarely caused any trouble. He worked part-time at the local hardware store and spent most of his free time in his room. Though we weren't especially close, we had a cordial relationship built on mutual respect. I had always seen him as someone who valued his space and privacy, just like his father. Over the years, I'd grown used to the quietness in the house when it was just the two of us. As I set my bag on the kitchen counter and poured myself a glass of water, I noticed Logan's truck parked in the driveway. Odd, I thought. He usually worked the evening shift. I called out his name casually, my voice echoing through the empty house. No response. Assuming he was in his room with his headphones on or just napping, I didn't think much of it. After finishing my water, I decided to head upstairs to change into something more comfortable. The long day had left me wanting nothing more than to relax. Passing by the bathroom, I noticed the faint sound of running water and the door slightly ajar. This struck me as odd. Logan was meticulous about privacy. He always closed doors firmly, especially the bathroom door. My curiosity piqued. I hesitated for a moment before gently pushing the door open a fraction more. What I saw stopped me in my tracks. Logan was standing by the sink, his back turned to me, his shoulders hunched in a way that suggested he was concentrating on something. His movements were awkward, almost frantic, and I noticed he was shirtless, his jeans hanging loosely on his hips. In his hands, he appeared to be holding a washcloth, scrubbing at something out of view. The creak of the door startled him. He spun around, his eyes wide with panic. "Oh my God. I didn't hear you come in," he exclaimed, his voice shaky. I froze, equally startled, my eyes darting between him and the washcloth. A rush of awkwardness crashed over me like a tidal wave. It wasn't the scene I had expected to walk into, and I couldn't help but feel guilty for intruding. I'm so sorry," I stammered, turning my gaze away. "I didn't mean to intrude." I quickly stepped back, my heart pounding in my chest. I reached for the doorknob, ready to retreat and give him the privacy he clearly wanted. But before I could close the door, Logan's voice stopped me. "Wait," he said, his tone pleading. "It's not what you think." I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Part of me wanted to bolt down the hallway and pretend this never happened. But another part was curious. His voice didn't carry the defensiveness of someone caught doing something wrong. Instead, it was laced with embarrassment and desperation. Against my better judgment, I turned back to face him, keeping my gaze fixed on his face. "Okay," I said cautiously, trying to keep my tone neutral. "What's going on?" Logan looked down, his face flushed a deep red. He seemed to be struggling to find the right words, his hands fidgeting with the washcloth. Finally, he let out a deep sigh and said, "It's just..." I didn't know who else to ask. Ask about what? I pressed gently, my curiosity growing despite the awkwardness of the situation. He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. "It's personal," he admitted. "I've been dealing with some stuff, and I don't know what to do. Dad's not here, and you're the only other person I can talk to." The fact that Logan was turning to me as the person he could talk to caught me off guard. Logan had always been independent, rarely opening up about anything personal. The fact that he was turning to me for help made me pause. I took a step into the bathroom, closing the door slightly behind me to give us some privacy. "All right," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Why don't you tell me what's going on?" Logan hesitated, then finally began to explain. He spoke in vague terms at first, stumbling over his words as he tried to describe the discomfort he'd been experiencing. I listened patiently, piecing together what he was trying to say. It soon became clear that this was a sensitive issue, one he felt too embarrassed to discuss with Dad. As he talked, I couldn't help but feel a pang of empathy. It's never easy to ask for help, especially about something so personal. I could see the struggle in his eyes, the internal battle between wanting to get help but being afraid of judgment. "Okay," I said after a moment of thought. "First of all, it's good that you're paying attention to these things. It shows you care about your health. Second, there's no shame in asking questions or seeking advice." Logan looked up at me, his eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and relief. "Really? You don't think it's weird?" "Not at all," I assured him. "Everyone has questions about their body at some point. It's normal." I spent the next several minutes offering him advice to the best of my ability, drawing from my own knowledge and experience. I tried to keep the conversation as practical and matter-of-fact as possible, avoiding anything that might make him feel more uncomfortable. I could tell that this conversation was a huge relief for him, even if it had been an awkward one to start. As the conversation progressed, the initial awkwardness began to dissipate. Logan seemed to relax, and I could tell he appreciated having someone to talk to. By the time we finished, he looked visibly calmer. He even managed a small smile. "Thanks," he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "I didn't think I could talk to anyone about this." I returned his smile, feeling a sense of relief that the tension had passed. "You're welcome, Logan. And remember, it's always okay to ask for help. No one has all the answers." As I left the bathroom, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of emotions. On the one hand, I was glad I could be there for Logan when he needed someone to talk to. On the other hand, the situation had been so unexpected and so out of the ordinary that I wasn't sure how to process it. Something about the encounter felt significant, like it had marked a shift in our relationship. I just didn't know what it meant or how it would play out in the days to come. I tried to shake off the strange feeling as I went about the rest of my evening, but it lingered in the back of my mind like a shadow. The house was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the air conditioning. Thomas came home late that night, tired but cheerful, completely unaware of the peculiar conversation that had taken place in his absence. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't help but replay the events of the evening in my mind. Something had changed, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. All I knew was that life in our household would never feel quite the same again. The days following that unexpected encounter were peculiar, to say the least. It wasn't that anything overtly dramatic happened, everything on the surface appeared normal. Thomas carried on with his work as usual. Logan maintained his routine of part-time shifts and studying. And I continued balancing my responsibilities at home and work. But beneath the surface, there was an unspoken tension, subtle but palpable, between Logan and me. It wasn't just that we were now more aware of each other's vulnerabilities. It was something deeper. A shift in the dynamic had occurred, one that I wasn't sure how to navigate. Logan had always been an enigma to me, keeping most of his life to himself. Our conversations, though cordial, had never gone beyond surface-level pleasantries. But now, after the bathroom conversation, I felt a new level of understanding between us, one that felt both uncomfortable and strangely comforting. I found myself thinking about him more than I should. Not in a motherly or even concerned way, but rather with a sense of wonder. How had I not seen this side of him before? I realized that Logan was more than just the quiet young man who kept to his room. There was a depth to him, an emotional world that I hadn't even begun to understand. It was a Friday evening when the change in Logan's behavior became more noticeable. Thomas had gone out to meet with a client, and I was preparing dinner. Logan hadn't yet returned from his shift at the hardware store. I was chopping vegetables when I heard the familiar sound of his truck pulling into the driveway. I paused, my knife hovering midair, wondering how I should greet him. The awkwardness that had settled between us over the past few days had created a wall I wasn't sure how to break down. When the front door opened, I called out, "Hey, Logan," trying to sound casual. He didn't answer right away, but I heard his footsteps as he walked into the kitchen. He looked tired but managed a faint smile. "Hey," he said quietly. "What's for dinner?" I smiled back, relieved that he wasn't acting as distant as he had in the past few days. "Just some pasta." "You hungry?" "Yeah, I'm starving," he said, walking over to the counter to get a glass of water. We ate together in silence at first, the only sound being the clink of forks against plates. But I noticed that Logan seemed more at ease than he had in days. His smile seemed a little more genuine, and his body language was less stiff. After a while, he set his fork down and looked at me, a faint blush coloring his cheeks. "I've been thinking about what you said the other night," he started, hesitating for a moment before continuing. "And I wanted to thank you again for listening." I glanced up from my plate, meeting his eyes. The sincerity in his voice was enough to make my heart soften. I had been waiting for this moment, unsure of how to respond but glad he felt comfortable enough to speak. "Of course, Logan," I said, my voice gentle. "I'm glad I could help." There was another long pause, but this time, I didn't feel the same awkwardness I had earlier. It felt like we were truly talking, not just filling the space with polite conversation. "You've always been nice to me," he continued, his voice quieter now. "And I didn't want you to think that I didn't appreciate it." I nodded, unsure how to express how much his words meant to me. "I know it's not always easy," I said after a moment. "But I'm glad you know you can talk to me anytime." He smiled again, this time with a little more ease. "I'll try to remember that," he said, reaching for another bite of his pasta. As dinner progressed, we slipped into more casual conversation. We talked about his studies, how his part-time job was going, and the latest show we were both watching on Netflix. It was a small step forward, but a step nonetheless. I realized that, though things had been awkward after our initial conversation, Logan was beginning to open up in small ways. Later that evening, after we finished eating, I sat down on the couch to unwind with a book. I heard Logan retreat to his room, his footsteps soft against the floor. I couldn't help but wonder if he was still processing everything we had talked about. The next few days were more of the same. Thomas came home later each night, his work demanding more and more of his time. Logan, though less distant than he had been, still kept to himself in many ways. We shared brief but significant conversations during dinner, and he seemed more comfortable around me. But there was an underlying tension that neither of us seemed willing to address. It was during one of those quiet evenings, about a week after our conversation in the bathroom, that Logan did something that caught me completely off guard. It was nearing bedtime, and I was curled up on the couch watching the latest episode of a drama. Suddenly, Logan appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Can I talk to you?" he asked, his voice just above a whisper. I sat up quickly, unsure of what to expect. "Of course. Come on in." He hesitated for a moment before stepping fully into the room. His posture was stiff, as if he wasn't sure what he was about to say. "What's on your mind?" I asked gently, trying to create a safe space for him. Logan shifted from foot to foot, avoiding my gaze for a moment before speaking. "I've been thinking about the stuff I talked to you about, and I think I need to tell Dad," Logan said, his voice trembling slightly. "I don't know how, but I think he needs to know what I'm going through." I was stunned by his words. The vulnerability he was showing now was different from before. This wasn't just about confiding in me anymore, this was a step forward. He was taking responsibility for his feelings and acknowledging that he needed support, not just from me but from Thomas as well. I smiled, trying to reassure him. "That's a big step, Logan. And I think Thomas will appreciate you coming to him. It's not easy, but it's important." Logan nodded, his eyes meeting mine. There was a flicker of gratitude in his gaze, and I could tell that deciding to speak to Thomas hadn't been an easy choice for him. "I don't want to make things weird between us," he said quietly. "I know it's been different lately." I shook my head, feeling a rush of warmth toward him. "It's not weird at all," I assured him. "We're family, Logan. We help each other, no matter what." He gave me a small, grateful smile and nodded before turning to leave. "Thanks for everything," he said over his shoulder as he left the room. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Pride swelled in my chest. He was learning to communicate, to seek help, to process his emotions in a healthier way. I couldn't help but feel like I was witnessing a pivotal moment in his growth. The next day, Thomas came home from work earlier than usual. He looked exhausted, but there was a certain lightness to his steps as he walked through the door. "Hey," he greeted, dropping his briefcase by the entrance. "How's everything going?" "Good," I replied with a smile. "I think Logan has something on his mind, though." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "He's been more open lately," I explained. "And he mentioned that he wanted to talk to you about something important." Thomas's expression softened. A mixture of concern and anticipation crossed his face. "I'll talk to him," he said, a quiet resolve in his voice. "Thanks for letting me know." That evening, after dinner, Thomas and Logan sat down together in the living room. I couldn't hear much of their conversation from where I was, but I saw Logan leaning in, speaking earnestly to his father. Thomas listened intently, his face a mix of concern and warmth. It was a pivotal moment for their relationship. I could see it, Logan crossing a threshold into adulthood, and Thomas ready to meet him there. In the weeks that followed, life began to settle back into a rhythm. The unspoken tension between Logan and me gradually faded. He no longer avoided me, though I could sense he was still processing everything he'd shared. But he seemed lighter somehow. More himself. Thomas and Logan started spending more time together, and their bond visibly grew stronger. Thomas made an effort to be more present for his son, which made all the difference. One weekend, Thomas suggested we take a day trip to the lake. It was his way of strengthening the bond between the three of us, and I thought it was a wonderful idea. The weather was perfect, clear blue skies with a gentle breeze. We packed a picnic, loaded the car, and set off for a day of relaxation and fun. At the lake, we spent hours swimming, playing frisbee, and lounging on the shore. Logan seemed genuinely happy, laughing and joking with Thomas in a way I hadn't seen before. It warmed my heart to see them connecting, and I felt hopeful. This trip felt like a turning point for all of us. As the sun began to set, casting golden hues over the water, we sat on the beach, enjoying the last remnants of the day. Thomas had fallen asleep on a blanket, his snores blending with the gentle sound of the waves. Logan and I sat a few feet apart, watching the horizon. "Thanks for coming today," he said after a long silence. "It's been nice, you know. Just spending time together." I smiled, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. "I'm glad. We should do things like this more often." He nodded, his gaze fixed on the water. "Yeah. I think it helps." We sat in silence for a while longer. The unspoken understanding between us was enough to fill the quiet. When Thomas woke up, we packed up our things and headed home. The drive was filled with laughter and stories about the day. That night, as I lay in bed next to Thomas, I thought about how far we'd come as a family. The past few weeks had been challenging, but they had also brought us closer in ways I hadn't anticipated. Logan's journey was far from over, but I felt confident that he was on the right path, and that we were, too.
Ever heard a story so gripping it keeps you up at night? Welcome to Mr. Reddit, where real tales are wilder than fiction. Hit follow now and let each story leave you on the edge of your seat. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and don't forget to comment.